Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be hailing from. This is Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents, and I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks. It has been quite a while. It has been about 6 weeks or so since we've had an episode of RHEL Presents, and I've got to say, I've missed you all. I'm really excited about today's episode because I wish that I could have had access to Red Hat services back in the days when I was a systems administrator. But before we introduce our guests, multiple, I've got to do a thing. I've got to do something. And if my memory serves, I've got a co-host here. I do. It's Mr. Brian Smith.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
I'm wound up today. I was up late last night looking at YouTube analytics from 2023 and had multiple planning meetings yesterday about today's show and upcoming episodes. So I'm really excited to be back with y'all. We've got some cool plans for 2024. But Brian, glad to have you with me.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to be back. It's been a long time.
So we've got a full house today. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking to Red Hat Services, sort of the consulting wing of Red Hat, if you will. And we brought in experts on platforms, which is an unsexy way of saying RHEL, satellite, all the infrastructure, all the things you have to have in place. And then we've got a gentleman from middleware and a gentleman from OpenShift as well. So we're going to kind of talk about maybe you're a new customer, maybe you're looking to become a customer, but it's like, wow, a Linux distribution, management, automation tools. What do I do with all this? Red Hat Services is here to help us kind of get started along that path. So we're going to talk about how to get engaged with Red Hat Consulting, some of the problems, and maybe we can coax a few anecdotes out of our guests today, things that they've seen in the wild. So with that said, no more rambling from the host. Let's bring in our guests. We'll start with Mr. Jerome Young. Welcome to the show, and introduce yourselves for us.
Yeah, good to be here. Jerome Young, architect, been in Red Hat for just over 12 years. Deal a lot with our foundational technologies, as you mentioned, like platform technologies, satellite, OpenShift, of course, RHEL, but also add-on technologies such as identity management and Red Hat Directory Server, Red Hat Cluster Suite, as well as, of course, Ansible for config management.
We got to come up with a more exciting title than like platform. That just
I
sounds
agree.
boring. But I mean, all my sysadmins in the audience have got to say that RHEL and satellite and Ansible is awesome. It's so cool. We don't care about workloads. We just run RHEL to run RHEL, right?
Sure. I mean, that's that. I would love that, but you still have to do something with it. So,
well, that's heartbreaking. But speaking of workloads, let's bring in our expert from middleware. David, welcome to RHEL Presents.
Hey, I'm David Gordon. Yes, I work in middleware, but also like platform, we are not saying that word very much anymore. We're saying, kind of application services, or we feel like that word doesn't quite describe everything in our portfolio there. So yeah, just to give you an idea of like kind of the domain that I work in, integration in general. So things like Camel, these kinds of things, APIs and API management. Also, just application development in general, so frameworks and runtimes and things like that. So that's my domain. I live in Orlando, Florida, and I've been working with Red Hat for like 9-ish years.
I just passed 4, so it seems like 40, but it's been 4 years already.
It goes faster over time.
It really does. And last but not least, I promised a full house. We've got Matt from the OpenShift services side. So Matt, why don't you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, happy to be here, guys. Thanks for allowing me to join and put my OpenShift spin on it. So my name is Matt Witzman. I work with and work for the cloud platform practice. I was once an architect for the group, and now I have the honor to run the group in professional services. So we handle things like solutions around OpenShift and the ecosystem that's represented there. Things certainly like ACM, if you don't know what that is, that's our cluster manager. ACS, which is our cluster security. Quay, our enterprise registry, and ODF, which is our storage solution, all wrapped into one conglomerate of technology to help you solve your challenges. As much as I love playing with technology, I love solving the challenges. So we do a lot of solution development along the way, understanding and listening to our customers, and then providing really a pattern for the next series of discussions that we either have with that particular customer or customers of the like. And so they get the benefit of the learned journey that we have along the way from our services organization. And so I work with David and Jerome quite frequently. Certainly they represent different areas of Red Hat services, but in the end, most of it lands on OpenShift or adjacent to it. So anyway, that's me a little bit in a nutshell.
Well,
Yeah,
welcome
yeah,
everyone.
we invited Matt just to pick on the OpenShift guy in the group. So like notice he's the only one that put his job description in his name.
Touche. Yeah, I deserve that.
I warned you. I told you that I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah, for sure. It's well warranted. I take it with a grain of salt. It's all good.
Sorry, Brian, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say let's start with the very basics here. Can one of you explain, like, what is Red Hat Consulting, and what can it do for our customers?
All right, you're going to make me do this. All right, Matt, how about you give us your first spin?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, I thought I saw Jerome starting to lead us down that path. Happy to do so. So Red Hat Services is a culmination of our associates that are experts or subject matter experts in a particular area or areas of technology to help our customers accelerate their adoption of that technology to solve their particular use cases. So I'll give you a kind of a fuzzy example. So somebody maybe from our financial services vertical, just think banks or credit cards, things like that. One of those customers may need to leverage RHEL, and that's probably been their unique journey, starting from day one. But as technology grows, they need to leverage software, our software, hopefully, to help them solve their challenges. Like, let's say, real-time payments. That's a very interesting topic in and of itself. So how do we transfer money from one entity to another in real time? Right now, you typically go through a clearinghouse, but those type of things in those areas of expertise that might be in just financial services, those bleed back into other areas, not only of technology, but individuals. So we're constantly in this motion of relearning not only what we can do with the technology, but what our customer can do, and then sharing it in the open source way. So one of the things I like to say about Red Hat Professional Services is we bring the secret sauce and we give it to you freely in an open source way. So you want to think about it in those terms.
Jerome, yeah, David, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I guess add on. It's really kind of add on to what Matt was saying, more mentoring. So we basically want to make sure that when we leave, that you're fully enabled as a customer, and you don't need our help. And when you do want us back, we're basically helping you stair step to the next level, essentially. So making sure you're enabled on Red Hat technologies, or even best practices of Red Hat technologies interacting with other technologies.
And the only thing I would add to that is that, sometimes customers come to us with technical goals, right? And that's fairly straightforward. Sometimes they know exactly what technology they want to adopt from our portfolio, but you can also come to us with business problems to solve and engage our architects to put together a plan. And maybe you don't have it developed, maybe you don't know what parts of the portfolio make sense for your use case, but we can help you put that together. And especially in the application domain, we're very close to the business problem, so you might want to talk to us.
And I really like that. Usually when my brain comes to consulting, I think of hands-on keyboard, but I especially like what Jerome was saying about like almost a mentor-like relationship, just because getting established with a new product technically is one thing. Integrating into your culture is the true definition of whether a product or a project was successful. You can have the best automation tool, Ansible, in the market, but if no one adopts it, if no one moves to that infrastructure as code, that automated deployment and maintenance that comes with AAP, then you failed. You could have that tool in place and no one ever use it. We affectionately call that shelfware, where you bought a subscription for something and figuratively, you know, it sits at a box on the shelf and never gets used. So I really like that idea of embedding a product into the workflow, into the culture of an organization. That's not something I think that's communicated often enough. But it is great to hear that there's also a lot of hands-on keyboard, almost, I don't want to say staff augmentation, but kind of that's what we're talking about here. Of I've got satellites, and this thing looks great. I took 3 or 4 days of training, but there's no way that I can get this up and running. I need someone who is an expert to come in for a couple of weeks, for a couple of week engagement, and just help me get this thing set up. Show me some tricks. Tell me things that you've run into.
Yeah, but I think what David was kind of mentioning actually kind of goes to a good point is we do have a lot of customers who basically are looking for a smart guy in the room. And hey, you know a lot about technology, not just mentioning about Red Hat technologies, but how does this interact with other technologies? Should I be bringing in some of those other technologies that either Red Hat products may be able to fulfill or may not be able to fulfill? So there's quite a trusted advisor role that we play as well for a lot of clients.
Yeah, another thing I would add to this, it's a kind of a moniker that I'll share with my folks that I work with, is a lot of times the customer has no idea what the technologies can even do to begin with, let alone try to do the implementation and then really take it to the ownership level. And so you see there's 3 main categories there. And I label these in columns as a C1, because the customer just needs to see this so they can ask informed, intelligent, questions about how it's going to help them. And that's ultimately the goal. We want to help them with this. The second thing is they need to put their hands on the keyboard, and they need to fail fast, but not fail often. There's a real distinction here that it's okay to fail, but I don't want to make the same mistake over and over and over again. That's just chaos. And so having the ability to do one and then take that knowledge and that experience and share it with somebody else, because then that's when it really becomes solidified and you start to really own what you can and cannot do potentially with the software and how you're solving your business challenges. And so that C1, do one, teach one is that mentoring aspect that we talk about. That's how we break it down a little bit further along the way, understanding that the customer may be at 101 version of the understanding, and we will take them to the 500 level advanced capabilities because of the expertise that we've gained over time and space and through different verticals. Because somebody like in the telco space, they're very interested in speed, very, very interested in speed. Well, it's not to say that that vertical is only interested in speed. There are other verticals that are interested in speed. Everyone wants to be faster. There's no doubt about that. But transactionally faster, yes. So FSI, as I said a little bit earlier, they're interested in speed, but they're also interested in security and making sure that processes are followed, because you have personal information they're needing to protect. So what you might think of as daily capabilities in one particular vertical or area of a business, that can lead into another area. And that's where our services organization has this cross-pollination that happens. And so it's such a wonderful environment to work in. Like if you ever wanted to do consulting, this is kind of a plug for the groups, and you want to be able to touch different areas of industry verticals, consulting, especially Red Hat consulting, is a way to really do that. So that's just a little bit of a plug for, I love what I do. I love the people that I work with, and every day is a good day when we come to work here at Red Hat.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
If I could piggyback off of that real fast, I really agree with Matt there, and I love this job, and it's really a unique educational experience that I don't think I could replicate in any other context, right? We get to bounce from like Fortune 500 to Fortune 500 or large scale organization and look under the hood and experience their cultural and technological transformation, personally. And then we bring that experience to the table to the next customer. So it's this like snowball effect. And so along with Matt, I'll plug this job if you're interested. It is amazing educational experience, and I think it really brings value to each customer cumulatively as we go. So
very cool. Well, this all sounds really amazing. So if there's people watching, they're interested in maybe having consulting in their environment, like how do they get started? What's the process to engage with the Red Hat Consulting Group?
Yes, Matt. Do you want to take that one, Matt?
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I've been doing a lot of the talking, but
Okay.
so you have what we call a services manager that's strictly focused on helping you obtain your business objectives and your use of the software, and they're called a territory services manager. They're part of a larger account team in the sales organization, and we kind of hang off of that sales organization, if you will, because we're not in the sales realm. We're not really there to sell you anything. We're just there to help you be a better version of you with our technology. And so you would engage what we would call the account team. They're the account executive from Red Hat. And if you don't know who that is, certainly you can call support, and they will route you to the correct person as well. So I think that's kind of the short answer without being too specific, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes that once that connection is kind of made, then we kind of do a discovery with you to figure out what are your business problems, or what are the problems you're trying to solve, and to see if Red Hat Consulting can come help you with that problem, and what would the effort would be to potentially solve that problem or phase out solving that problem.
And I'm assuming you have options for going on site for customers, or remote options. How does all that work?
Yeah, I guess I could go with that one. So yeah, we do both on site and off site. I would say significantly since the pandemic, off site has been a preferred for quite a few customers, since their own employees are in many disparate places as well. But we do have many folks, especially in the Virginia area, who quite often are on site.
And I would just like to mention that this is a no commitment thing, right? So there's not a lot of risk involved in starting a conversation with us, and maybe it doesn't lead anywhere, but maybe there are some things that you can learn from our architects, and we can create a partnership from the conversation. So no risk to you. I encourage everyone to explore anything that they would like to talk to a consultant about and feel like they could partner with us on.
Yeah. So oftentimes, like we'll start conversations with customers. Sometimes they know the technologies, like so let's talk about more of like the foundational RHEL type things. But then, how do I use that technology at scale? How do I do it not just 1,000 machines, but 100,000 machines? That becomes a much different problem than just dealing with a small amount of machines. So sometimes just having the idea of, hey, here are the technologies we need to put in place, can start that conversation. And a lot of the times they'll start the conversation and come back to services when they finally got a good grip on things and say, okay, hey, we're ready to finally do this, but thanks for getting that ball started with us through these initial conversations. Any other questions?
Sorry, I was catching up on chat, but so, goodness, you can tell it's the beginning of a new year. I'm still coming out of the end of year fog. So if I'm a new customer and I just bought this pile of SKUs, how do we kind of connect those dots? I mean, we've talked about some of the different services, some of the different lowercase o offerings, but like we've got a good cross section of our services organization with the three of you. So like with Jerome, maybe first talk about this kind of progression from I have RHEL systems to I have more of a standard operating environment, if you will, kind of a unified space, and then kind of talk about how some of these management tools layer on top. And then we'll circle to David and Matt with the same question. So be prepared.
So normally it starts off with, and again, I think Matt had brought up, like we have customers just at different levels. Some of them are at 101 level, some are at 300 level, but still even between there, a lot of the times is how am I actually doing things to best practices? Is RHEL actually being installed properly given my environment, given my cloud environment, right? Or even on-premise environment? Am I using all the right tools, things like that? So we basically will kind of go through and build a standard operating environment for folks. From there, we would layer on such tools such as Satellite to help with management of patching and even potentially provisioning, or mixing in, Satellite with existing tools in the environment. And so that'll kind of get the patching story going. And then from there, we usually mix in Ansible, at least that's the Red Hat preferred config management to help manage the environment. And so it's basically just stepping. So now we've got Ansible in place. Next from there, normally there are other things such as identity management. So we've got all these RHEL systems. How do we have authentication actually in check for those RHEL systems? And then, of course, any other supporting tools such as potentially Red Hat Directory Server for other things, such as other applications. And even with Ansible, once Ansible's in place, it can do a lot of things, especially with event-driven Ansible, having it connect to ServiceNow. That's kind of a big story that a lot of folks like to do, because in ServiceNow you have this privilege escalate or basically approvals process that can work a lot better with businesses. So it's a little bit of step. Let's get you onto RHEL, and then we just step up of configuring RHEL, and then we step up more applications.
David and Matt, anything to add on that?
So and then we go to middleware. I guess we'll check the middleware.
Yeah. There you go.
So so I'll skip to the end, because really I'm at the top of the stack, right? So I build off of all the foundation that Jerome and Matt put in place. And so just to give you kind of an idea of how those things fit together, tell you about like some engagements that I'm working on right now. So Jerome, mentioned, Ansible automation platform. One of my customers is adopting Ansible automation platform and using that in combination with some Ansible roles that the AMQ team developed to deploy AMQ brokers. And so, these two technologies are working together using Ansible to provision and configure the AMQ brokers. So an example of, kind of layering on top of this, software is built in layers, right? And so, layering on top of the Ansible automation platform. And then, spoiling maybe Matt's answer here, on building on top of OpenShift, there are so many examples of that, right? And it's one of the great things, I think, about engaging an application services architect from Red Hat, or anyone in the application services space, is almost all of us have a really good backdrop of Kubernetes experience. So sometimes it's not just about middleware, how to manage middleware and best practices and these kinds of things. Sometimes it's about also how to do that on Kubernetes infrastructure, right? Or OpenShift-based infrastructure, right? So I'll pass back to Matt, so you can talk about the OpenShift layer tier too.
Yeah, so it's a real evolution. As Jerome started with, we talked about RHEL, and I love RHEL. For those that didn't know, I'm absolutely passionate about it. Before I came to Red Hat, I was at IBM and was a super RHEL user then. And I wanted to see what was more, what else was out there. I was very inquisitive. And so over 7 years ago, it was about 8 years ago, I said, what is this thing called containers? And you might be asking yourself, oh, okay, Podman, I've seen it in the chat over here, by the way. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that kind of sandbox capability of an isolation of a process? Okay,
it's a
really
fad.
cool.
It's going to go away.
What's that?
It's just a fad. It'll go away.
Well, I was told that when I was at IBM. So just a little funny, like, no, we don't really want to do that. I'm like, I think we do. So then I came to the source over here. When I say the source, I came certainly over here to Red Hat. And so that capability of that how we push the envelope of what was capable in RHEL to another capability outside of what we would consider RHEL. But OpenShift is RHEL, RHEL is OpenShift. Like those two things are really congruent with one another. Like there's no fork in there in the code. It's the same code. We just give it more capability. And that's honestly what OpenShift is we pair it with Kubernetes, our friends at Google and all the wonderful work they've done there, and the rest of the participants in the open source community, and built something that was very unique and usable, and it didn't go away. And so through time, all of the software platform that Red Hat represents run on OpenShift and runs on RHEL too. So they run in both places. Now you have to start to make the decision, where do I want my technology to go? Do I want it to stay in a VM? And maybe that's true. And there's a lot of use cases where we see our customers that have plenty of RHEL workloads that they have a reason they're going to stay on a RHEL VM or a bare metal node. But then we have customers that really want to migrate into a container platform and start to dip their toe in the water, or even excel in that same space under container orchestration and software defined in such a way that you don't need the heavy operating system. We can leverage the operating system underneath, in a singular format. So packaging that container started to save money for the customer. That was one of the good reasons. And not only just money from a licensing standpoint, but money from CPU, money from memory, from storage. There was a lot of gains in the density that you could start to create a software platform to really run in what would be considered a cost-constrained environment. I mean, I'm sure you all out there have an unlimited budget, and we'd love to talk to you, especially if you do, to help you get where you need to go. But that's not the case. That's really not the case. So many of the times that there's a constrained directive given by the business unit or by the company itself. And so you can take your journey through RHEL, you can take your journey alongside the middleware platform, or you can take your journey into OpenShift. So they don't have to be disparate, and they can easily work together.
Yeah, and I think that just shows where Red Hat basically can meet folks at different levels of where they're at. And a lot of the times when I start with folks at that 101 level of RHEL, maybe 3 years later, they start talking about Podman. I've been this Pod. Well, hey, if you're going to start using Podman and you've already gotten a little comfortable with it, let's start to take that to the next level. And that's where OpenShift becomes just the natural progression.
So one question I had is how long are your typical consulting engagements that you engage with customers?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I'm going to go ahead and take that one as well. At least I'll take the first swing at it, since I create a lot of these solutions along the way. So let me just start from the evolution of them before I get to the timeline of them. So the evolution is like, we didn't know. Remember I talked about like the C1 aspect of it. It's like, well, I understand your business challenges. I think it'll take this long. And so we had to kind of prove it out with the customers many, many times. And then over time, as the technology got more mature and easier, it shortened the timelines of those typical engagements. And then we said, all right, well, we can do what we used to do in 12 weeks. Now we can really do it in 8 weeks. But if we can do it in 8 weeks, what other value can we provide to them? Because 8 weeks may not be the end goal for that particular customer. Maybe it's a budgetary constraint, and we're willing to acquiesce there. However, we understand what the roadmap looks like to true success all the way into production. So a typical engagement, what we've done over time, like it was the quote unquote, it was like 12 week scenario, right? So this, if you've ever worked with Red Hat Consulting, especially 4.5 years ago, everything seemed to fit in this 12-week engagement. But what I did over time, especially, and encourage our other practice leads to look at this, how can we make it more modular, but just as much success along the way? Like we've met all the success criteria, but how can we do it shorter? And the challenges that we fought were, yes, we can do it shorter, but the uptake of the technology alongside the customer, especially if they're at a one-on-one, they just didn't get the soaking in of that to them or with them. So I give you an example in this. Like if something was going wrong with a particular application, you would have to know how and why and where to go look. And then what's the next logical question you would ask yourself once you were at that particular level? So critical thinking skills were built upon. And so as much as I'd love to say, man, we can knock all these things out in 6 weeks, the reality is that's not the model that we work from. It's because of the mentoring. We need to spend time with you and make sure that you understand it and kind of keep some guardrails alongside you as you're going through the technology, as we're kind of guiding you in a direction. At some point in time, we want you to be the leader of that particular software, from the OpenShift perspective, or let's think about it from that. At some point, I want them to take the lead and start to think about how and where we want to go next. And then the architect and the consultants can help them in that decision path and say, you know what, You're absolutely right. However, maybe you need to consider some other areas of architecture to make sure that it really is the right choice. And so it's that guiding, leading aspect of it. So I would love to say 12 weeks. I'd love to say 10 weeks, but each customer is very unique in where they need to go. And so we need to solve the challenges for that customer. But in the process, in a shorter way, we've created small working blocks, knowing that there are more blocks along the way. And we're happy to give that to the customer if they want to do it on their own. But we really want them to be critical thinkers in the space, thinking it in a technology space like Red Hatters think about this technology. So that's my long-winded answer. How did I do?
You did okay. I think you did okay.
So I like the direction the conversation just turned. So I'm going to call out Jerome here, and obviously more and more engagements are remote versus on-site. But I'm having done this for a number of years. I want to get your take on what does the engagement look like from your perspective, because I've heard some of the road warrior horror stories about, you get shipped out to Arizona in the middle of August, and then a few months later it's January and you get sent to New York, because consulting engagements and travel plans don't seem to own a calendar or a weather almanac. At least that was my experience. So I just kind of want to know, like, it's Sunday, you're getting ready for your work week. Like, what? Let's take a traditional on-site. I think we can kind of extrapolate from there what it would look like remote, but traditional on-site engagement, what does that look like, both from your perspective, and then from maybe David, you could take it from a perspective of, we've got this 8, 10, or 12 week plan. What does it look like? Or do you spend a week doing discovery? How does that lay out? So Jerome, why don't you tell us a little bit from
So from a
front lines what it looks like?
Yeah, so I guess from a travel perspective, it all depends. A lot of times you want to be at the customer site on kind of Monday morning, or at least to wherever the customer meets. Seems the folks in California do meet a little bit later in the morning. So basically, you're either flying out Sunday night or Monday morning to get to the customer site, and you're usually on the customer site Monday to Thursday, and then flying back Friday, or flying back Thursday night or Friday, depending on how long you're at the customer. And then that can kind of be a repeating cycle. Or the customer, usually it's for some customers, it's a meet in person. Okay, we've now comfortable, we can do remote. And that's kind of usually how the on-sites go. And then for the engagement, so Matt was describing a little bit of how OpenShift engagements go. When it comes to the more foundational platform engagements, those can go between 2 weeks to 4 weeks to 6 weeks, and a lot of that really does depend on the mentoring and the problem solving. Because since you have all these foundational things, sometimes if someone says, I need to just solve this problem, okay, that could potentially be a 3 week thing. But we also want to see, what is the value we can bring in on top of that, and not just come in to solve the problem, but there may be a larger problem a part of it. But when you're first starting out at a customer site, essentially you're just trying to, we've already had a discovery session. You're trying to get exactly what the customer is looking for, laying out the architecture, and also figuring out for that customer what are going to be all the requirements. What are the firewall rules that's going to be had? Even though you could try to tell them up front of, hey, here's what we need. It turns out, well, either somebody got busy or whatnot. To make sure all of these little things are in place, given the architecture we agree upon, or again, in that first week, we're trying to lay that out, given the problems. And then people will actually kind of open up as well of things that we may not have talked about before once you're kind of on site. And then, of course, once that gets going, then you can start working through the problems. And again, as we're kind of going through it, as Matt kind of mentioned, sometimes they're discovering capabilities as we're going along, and they're like, "Whoa, wait a second! I didn't know this could do this. Let's try to rethink of how we're going to do this now that we know about this." And so that can make things somewhat dynamic, but we do try to drive the train in a straight direction.
So like showing up on Monday morning at 9 a.m. only to find out that, oh yeah, that big architecture diagram, it might work because I forgot to mention we're disconnected.
Yes, that could happen. That could happen.
So that's a great overview of the engagement process. But what is it like for you being on the ground? Like, what does that look like day in and day out?
Usually at the client, I guess I'll let David go next here, but usually on the ground, it's a lot more meeting folks in person and actually, setting up meetings, getting to know them. Also, if potentially we can get access to things. But one of the things we try not to do is just sit in a corner and work. No, we want to be with you. We want to sit with you. We want you to actually be on the keyboard if possible, and let's guide you through it. So then what we're doing, but also let's do some repetition, get it in your brain of what's going on. And so that the client can learn the process that we're thinking about, and they can start to also build on top of that. And that's also where they start to learn the capabilities, because a lot of consulting firms just basically, hey, hand me the task, throw me in a corner, and I'm just going to do it, and here you go. And a lot of time the client has no idea what's going on. We want to, help plan, but also help to execute with the client themselves, so that they are learning, and then they are able to take, what we basically built and run with on their own.
Eric, you were asking about kind of horror stories of being on the ground, and I just wanted to share a quick anecdote to give you an idea of what can happen. It was like the middle of winter, and they sent me out to a car manufacturing plant. Actually the plant where cars are manufactured. It was in the middle of nowhere. I had to drive like 90 minutes out of Indianapolis to get there in the freezing cold. I didn't know that my car was going to make it, and when I get there, that morning I had just chosen to be a little bit brave and wear a very loud color shirt. It was like a plaid shirt with a lot of pretty loud colors on it. So when I get here to this car manufacturing plant, I look around me and everyone is wearing a white jumpsuit. Like everyone, the people who are on the manufacturing floor and the people who are behind a computer developing software. Everybody is like uniform there. And so we have lunch in this enormous cafeteria with thousands of people on their lunch break. Every single one of them in a white jumpsuit, and there I am, like Where's Waldo, in the middle of the easiest Where's Waldo you've ever played in your life, in the middle of a sea of white jumpsuits. So just a little example there. But to kind of talk about like sort of our process and what our day-to-day is like a little bit, I just want to mention something that it might be a little bit unique about the application services domain. Not necessarily, not entirely, but we really lean on agile practices in application development. Sometimes it doesn't make as much sense with infrastructure stuff, because there's not as much dependencies and collaboration between various components that you're building and stuff like that. But it really helps us kind of almost guarantee that every week or 2 weeks or however long your sprint is, we're delivering something. And if we were to leave the next day, you would have some value. So I think that's a really important approach for us in application development, because like these guys have been saying, we don't always know what's coming, and we can't really always tell, what direction we're going to go in terms of technology. So Agile's a great tool to kind of go with the flow.
I like that.
And oftentimes
Promise value every week or every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and oftentimes we will actually do agile, especially when there's a larger customer when it comes to the foundational products. But again, when it comes to some of the RHEL technologies, it's usually a smaller team involved. So sometimes that's not as needed. They're just like, hey, let's just get into it. But the one thing we just really try to keep in mind is that we are delivering value while we're doing things, and not just letting things hit the floor.
So I started out at Red Hat as a technical account manager, and that's an area very near and dear to my heart. So I was just wondering, how do you all work with customers who have TAMs? Do you work with the TAMs at all? How does that relationship work?
Oh yeah, let me take this, because I personally love TAMs as well, because they're with the customer in longer in duration than I ever would be showing up alongside the customer. Yeah, I'm going to bring immediately great velocity and knowledge, But that technical account manager, we call them TAM. So just hang with me when I continue to say TAM, folks, on the stream. The TAM is the co-pilot. And I seriously 100% mean that. I want them alongside and be fully aware of what we're trying to do with a customer. So success criteria, exit criteria, understanding, what particular applications we're going to be running there. What are those SLAs? Or is there an SRE model put in place? All of that, because when we disengage from Red Hat consulting, because services is a larger umbrella, it has training and TAMs and then our professional services. But when we disengage, that TAM is still there helping the customer. So I cannot possibly leave them in the dark. Like, that would be counterintuitive to all the things I've already previously said about how we invest in the customer. We bring the secret sauce with us. Sure, yes. But that TAM is so pivotal to make sure the success happens, that roadmap, right? Because a lot of times we get focused on the trees and not realize that you're still really in the middle of a forest. But you're so focused on those trees and knocking down individual tasks or knocking down individual objectives with a longer term vision and goal at the end to be bigger, stronger, faster. Whatever your business challenges are, you're going to have faster time to market against one of your direct competitors. And you want an application that has a bunch of microservices involved in. So you want to be able to deploy code at the end of every Friday or, whatever the scenario is. The TAM is going to be there when we're not there, and they're super important. But I'll stop saying that. David, maybe you have an additional experience there.
Oh no, I agree. I think it's the consistency and a TAM has all of the kind of Red Hat context, and so their ears can perk up. When things that customers don't necessarily recognize, like this is an opportunity to get some guidance from Red Hat. So they're always there, making sure that no opportunities go unnoticed for us to add value. I love that about them, along with the consistency that they bring.
Yeah, and I think they just have more the breadth of the customer, so they know a lot more about what's going on with the customer, where we're a little bit more tight focused on where we're looking. So yeah, I think that I work with a TAM now, the customer, and they're able to bring in things. They'll see we're working on something. They're like, hey, the other side of the house actually is looking at something different. You guys need to start talking to each other so we can, make sure everything is in good cohesion.
So Matt, we didn't talk about OpenShift all that much. So what is it? Actually, no, we did. You led off that conversation. But one thing we haven't gotten from you is an anecdote from the road.
Oh, wow. I have a lot. So I'm no longer an architect. So let me just make that disclaimer. I mean, I am and I'm not. I just don't go see customers, unfortunately, anymore, nearly as often as I once did. But in the early beginning stages of the group that I now run, there were so few of us that had any kind of expertise in OpenShift. And one of the things that I was asked to do, I was down in Florida, down in David's neck of the woods. And I was working with a particular customer down there. We were having great success, and a hurricane was coming. And so I was like, hey, I have to get out of here. But, I understand our consulting model at that point was I was there at that customer every single week, helping them achieve their objectives. And I was like, I have to get out of here because I live on the coast. I live on the coast of North Carolina. And it might hit Florida where I was at, but it might also hit the coast of North Carolina where my family is. So I had to kind of switch modes there. So anyway, there's a little bit longer story. So the customer was not very pleased with me, as you can imagine, but I'm trying to do right by my family. They're first. So I fly home, I get there, the hurricane hits me. It doesn't hit Florida. I probably could have stayed down there, worked there. So I was out of work, had no internet, had no capabilities of working with a customer because I had already flown home and was there. So that's one of those unique situations where a natural disaster was good and bad at this, for my personal experience. I was home with my family, but probably would have been okay if because they were fine. It just knocked power out for us.
That's our version of snow days down here, hurricane days.
Yeah. I've also had a travel nightmare where I had to go to the West Coast. So I was going to help a customer that was in San Jose, California, and super pumped and excited to go out there. I was going to, take a journey on the way. Once I got out there, it literally took me 18 hours because of storms and things like that. Showed up the next morning with like 2.5 hours of sleep. help the customer design something that we would eventually, have agreements on later in a contracting scenario. Then my boss calls me and says, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you drop off and change your flight and go to Phoenix, Arizona and see another customer?" I'm like, "Well, sure, I guess so." I'm like on 2.5 hours of sleep. I change my flight. I go to Phoenix, Arizona, meet with the customer the very next day, and have a day-long discussion with them, and then flew back to my home, and then again I flew to Texas. So there is a road warrior scenario early on when we were working with our customers, but I wouldn't trade it. I really wouldn't. I would not trade it. It was so invigorating to be side by side with our customers, because they kind of peeled back the veil with us, and they're like, we'll show you really what's going on. And so there wasn't this video barrier from time to time we can see. So we had more velocity, certainly, working with them face to face.
Yeah, and I'll add, when you are doing kind of a road warrior type thing, you learn tricks of the trade, especially
for sure.
traveling, hotels and things like that. And so it doesn't. It's not as bad as it may seem, but you do at times, especially with airplane travel, what it is. You start to learn real quick of, hey, this plane is likely to get delayed. Let me run to the desk, get a flight, before it's gonna get you there earlier, and you just learn how to play that game.
Yep. I've often thought, maybe not on this show, but somewhere we need to have an episode where a lot of us former road warriors talk about what it was like and tips and tricks that we've picked up. But Jerome, I don't think we got an anecdote from you. Funny
Well,
story, a disaster story.
Funny story is lunch at a big insurance company in New Jersey, and I was walking. They have a big lake outside, and I was walking along the lake, and I got chased by ducks. And these ducks are vicious, vicious, and they were known to chase by ducks. And I'm like, why are these ducks after me? And they're like, yeah, you're not supposed to walk too close to the lake because they get agitated and they will start to chase you. So just be aware. Be aware. That's real.
Okay, next time I sign a disclaimer before going to a customer site, and that I'll ask if that clause is in there somewhere.
Yeah. But I think it's you get to see one of the diverse work environments, and how a lot of offices can differ. Some of the newer startup environments is always hip and cool versus some of the more old school environments. They can be a little bit drab on the outside, but I think it's really getting to the people is the key thing. And as Nat was saying, once you're actually there, everybody's kind of in the same room. People really kind of open up, is what we find.
Yeah, you get to know people pretty well when you're at the keyboard for hours. Even more so
Yeah.
if you're together on a weekend or through a weekend outage or maintenance window. You get to know people pretty well. You even get to know their families too.
Yeah, no.
Magic happens over coffee breaks too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like the only reason I go to conferences live and in person is the hallway track. I mean, reInvent, I didn't get to leave the booth except to go eat, but just the number of conversations that were struck up, just running into people in person. And I'm so glad that we've moved to a more enlightened in-person approach for customers or conferences. Just the ability to pick and choose where, yeah, we need a whiteboard, we need to be in a room together to figure this out, or to do some paired programming, that kind of thing. Yes, we need to be in person for that. But do I need to fly out there for a day of status calls with customers? Probably not. We're starting to be more wise. And actually, a year ago, last December, actually canceled plans to go to an in-person planning meeting the night before, because I'd been under the weather, and pre-pandemic I'd been like, I'll be fine, just load up enough NyQuil in my suitcase, I'll be fine. And then my daughter came down with a fever too, and it's I felt no shame in texting my manager the day before my flight and go, I'll be there virtually, I can't make it. I was okay, but now my daughter's sick, so I don't know what that means for me. And so just a more enlightened approach of when does it make sense to be on site. But there's absolutely nothing to replace that kind of experience. which, sorry, Brian, I know we try and go back and forth, but that kind of ties into to the last question that I want to wrap us up on, and that's how did you come to be in the space? Talk to us as if you were talking to someone who's just starting out in their journey in technology, starting their career. If this sounds awesome, I mean, like the idea of going and teaching people and engaging with different people in different environments and learning technologies really in depth, but being in different places from engagement to engagement. If that sounds awesome to somebody, which I know if I were in my 20s and not had kids yet, that consulting would definitely have been something I would have been interested in. So, Jerome, David, Matt, we'll go in that order. If you would just kind of tell us how you came to be in your role, and how would you advise someone else to if they wanted to follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, no, I guess yeah, I'll start it off really. Really, it was my fascination with Linux that really kind of just got me started. And then as I'm kind of working with customers, a lot of the technologies that I have a huge breadth of technology, especially around the platform area. But a lot of them, we just kind of you started small, usually working smaller engagements with customers, and then growing from there. But I'd say a lot of it for me, it's the teaching aspect, the mentoring aspect. So as I'm learning these new technologies, I'm actually teaching folks how I would learn even from a 101 level. Because you got to think about, okay, hey, their person, you got kids, people have kids, they've got all these things. They just need to be, kind of shepherded in to these technologies. And so I like to say I learn quick. I'll learn things quick, and then I will try to convey those in a consumable way for folks to be able to run with those and get up that ladder so we can go from RHEL to middleware to OpenShift, and keep that journey going. So that's kind of my thing. It's all about being a teacher essentially.
So that's actually the same reason I got into marketing. Was I get to go and play with the new features of the next release, and then I get to go tell people about it, whether like on a show like this or at a conference or a blog. Really enjoy the teaching and the sharing aspect. There's nothing like writing a blog right after you discovered a feature that's been in the operating system for 5 years that you just found.
And a lot of people just don't have time to be able to focus that to figure that out.
Right.
And so
Except when you find out that tool's been deprecated. So that's always disappointing. So, David, how about you?
Yeah, I want to leave some time for Matt here too, but my answer is kind of
he's OpenShift. It's fine.
Okay, cool. Fair enough. He already wrote his whole thing in his description there next to his name. I'm kidding, Matt. So a couple things. I was working for a startup, and we had just been acquired. It was a big integration in the travel space, and it was all written in a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, PHP, MySQL, that kind of thing. And the wheels were falling off the bus. This thing was not scaling. We were bringing on all kinds of new customers and new volumes, and the queues were just getting backed up for days. So people were like, "Where's my update?" And it was like, "Well, wait until Tuesday," which is way too late. So I started looking at Fuse, which at that time was an independent company called FuseSource, and ActiveMQ as well. Right at that time, a very timely acquisition by Red Hat, which made my argument to adopt this stack much, much easier, because that name was a recognized name. And anyway, I also convinced my leadership there to bring in Red Hat Consulting. And I didn't know at the time, but my future boss came down to be my Red Hat consultant. And I had a great experience, and I learned a ton, and we made a lot of headway. And I got a call from Red Hat Recruiting not too long after that, and it was a no-brainer for me. But I also want to mention just one more thing. That same company, when we were acquired, we had some values that were foisted on us, right? Like the leadership of that company developed this list of values. It drove me crazy because 6 of the values were nouns, but the last one was an adjective, global. And I was like, how can this be a value? It's not a value. It's the wrong part of speech. But anyway, it really made me want to look around for new things. And I would say that's one of the key things for me at Red Hat, is that my personal values align with this company's values, which are largely based around the philosophies of open source and stuff like that. I think there are very few other places where I would feel the same, and that's what really drew me to this space.
Extra bonus points for mentioning Red Hat consulting.
Well, I mean, well said, David. I completely agree. I have experienced the same scenario, although not in the integration space. But the evolution and the journey into consulting really started when I was at IBM. I wasn't a consultant at IBM, but I was part of a team that would put on what we called special events. So if you think 12 years ago, for sure, we put on all the tennis Grand Slams, that event. And so the digital experience with it, the US Open golf, the Masters golf, the Tony Awards. Those are the really fun, cool events that we got to travel to. But then we also got to travel to, part of my particular role is I would travel to data centers and either replicate and create another, AZ, if you want to think about it in those terms. I'd create another AZ, using, floor space and power and cooling and, devices. What am I going to put in here from an IBM perspective? But I got to do all that little travel stuff, and I really liked the travel. I had a customer, but it was really my colleagues that were my customer. I was helping them put on those events and things like that. And when the container space came around, when Docker, became prevalent in everyone's language of the next little toy they would play with in the Linux space, I fell in love with its capabilities and why it was there. And then I watched a podcast similar to this, and I'll give a shout out to Grant Shipley. If he ever hears this, I'm giving him credit. I listened to one of his talks around OpenShift, and I was like, I am sold 100%. And I immediately went out to the Red Hat website and I looked for the job. So I wasn't waiting on a recruiter to look for me. I wanted to come work at Red Hat, and I saw this consulting architect role, and I was going after it full on. And small sidestep. My hiring manager at the time said I was going to be too expensive to fly, and for my little small airport. What he didn't really understand is my little airport really flies a lot of places, and so it wasn't a big deal. So what I actually had to do, I was qualified for the role, but I was somewhat going to be seen as expensive to fly around. So I sent the recruiter. I sent a snippet of a couple of different destinations in the U.S. on the East Coast, some in Texas, some in California, and showed. Starting at, point in here where I'm at on the coast, and then starting point from Charlotte, North Carolina, major hub. And it was more often than not, but not always, more often than not, it was actually cheaper to fly from my airport than it would have been to fly from there. I know that seems potentially counterintuitive, but what I figured out over the years of traveling is they want you to stop in Charlotte and buy a whole bunch of stuff from their restaurants, expense it, and then get on your plane and keep going. So that's kind of how I got into from a services perspective. And then over time, I wanted to help manage people. And so now I've kind of moved my career direction into technical management. And so I have a team of managers, and I also have individual contributors within my organization. And I just work hand in glove with them and then others along the way. So for me, it's a perfect role. Love consulting, love to get back on the road, certainly. But anyway, that's me.
That's awesome. Yeah, a lot of great advice in here, and I love the anecdotes. There's, in fact, like it's a requirement to go out to dinner with your coworkers at a conference or something, and sit around until 3 a.m. and swap stories. It's a rite of passage, really. But yeah, a lot of good advice in here. And one of the themes that I picked up on was a lot of teach a person to fish instead of just handing them the fish. I really like a lot of the teaching and mentoring emphasis. It really came off in the episode as well. Instead of just here's a bill of materials. This is what we need. Go sit in this dark corner next to the guy who can't find a stapler. So a few folks got the Office Space reference, which I regularly promote on this show, because I think it's a requirement for anyone who's ever worked in an office or might end up working in an office.
My favorite movie.
I watched it again like 2 months ago just because it was time. But Matt, David, Jerome, thank you guys so much for joining us today. This was a great look at a very critical arm of Red Hat and our technology stack. It was great to see kind of the portfolio being represented here. I know this is RHEL focused, but it's as easy as a systems administrator or someone who works in RHEL marketing to kind of forget that what we do is part of a greater whole. So I liked the portfolio story today as well. And of course, Shantanu in the chat is talking about fish and vegetarians. So you never know what'll happen on this live stream. In fact, that brings us to our wrap up, because join us again. We are live every other Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Just be sure to add us to your calendar, hit the subscribe button so you can get notified anytime we go live. In fact, in 2 weeks, Brian will be with me again. We'll be actually interviewing a solutions architect and a partner advocate. I forget what his title is. He's kind of like Matt. He's got like 6 adjectives in his title. So we'll be actually interviewing my previous employer over at GitLab. We're going to have a solutions architect to talk about running GitLab on top of RHEL, because as I keep getting reminded, RHEL's awesome, but if you're running it, you probably have a workload to run on top of it. I guess my server lab here at home is the exception. Excuse me. But we'll be live in 2 weeks with that episode. But that's not all. Join Scott and Nate on Friday. I forgot their names. Join Scott and Nate for Into the Terminal on Friday. We're doing a Back to Basics episode talking about file archives. So tar, zips, and what the gzips and unzips and all the different things mean, and why they're important as you grow as a Linux systems administrator. So Brian, I'm going to make a promise to you this year. 2024, we're going to go back to a lot more show. We used to do a lot of show and tell. Lately, we've kind of been talking a little bit more. I think that's important. We've talked strategy, we've talked concept, we've talked vision. We did a lot of that in 2023. But one thing I'm itching to do, Brian, I really want to see some live demos. Maybe it's just because I want to watch them blow up, but live demos, man.
Sounds good to me.
Maybe we'll bring Matt back and have him build an OpenShift cluster from scratch. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. I've rambled on long enough, but thank you all for joining us. Make sure to hit that like button, share with a friend. I just did the 2023 YouTube analytics report for our live streaming, and I'm really excited to say we're growing, but we haven't reached everybody yet. I know there's some Linux systems administrators and some college or teenage students that would love to learn about Linux and get involved in, and not just Red Hat, but in a community around Linux and open source that literally has defined the last 20 years of my life. It's been an amazing journey, and I'm excited to continue it. That's all the New Year's cliches that I'll throw out there. But once again, Drone, David, Matt, thank you all for joining us as our guests. Brian's been my co-host, and I am Eric the IT Guy Hendricks. And on behalf of all of Red Hat, I can't just say RHEL today, on behalf of all of Red Hat, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time. Now, don't mind the host, as he forgot to be on the right screen to hit the outro video. So thank you all. See you later.